the fact that we've never investigated the impact of nutrition in the early addiction stages is just, it's long overdue.
Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Before we start today's episode, I want to remind you about our Family SOS Program. If you have a family or loved one who's struggling with alcohol or drug addiction, we're here to help you. We teach you how to help and motivate them while fighting less than ever before, and how to understand what the best options are for them while creating faster and longer lasting change. You also get to get real support from experts and a community of people like you, so you don't have to go through your struggles alone. The Family SOS Program offers affordable help right here, right now. We can get through this together. So, let's start simply.
Okay.
I know your name's Adam, but I don't know much about your recovery journey itself. So why don't you tell us how we got to be sitting here right now?
So I'm from Austin, Texas. I was originally born in Houston, but I'm a sixth or seventh generation Texan. So I grew up, identifying with that culture. I'm also Jewish. So I grew up, you could say I had like burgers and barbecue and bagels and blintzes. Right. It was like a standard American diet, wearing cowboy boots with some chutzpah. Yeah. I was born in 1982. I was part of that like last great generation that played outside. And I had a dad that taught me how to play every sport imaginable. He was the coach of my basketball team in Little League. And he taught me how to play football. And my mom was vastly involved in inspiring my imagination and my love of arts and being creative. And growing up, I had some things that had a profound impact on me. One of which was, people would say it's my relationship to food. I would say it's my relationship to myself. I was like 10 years old and I come running into the house from outside. I was swimming and my parents noticed and they called to my attention, "Why do you have love handles?" "Wow, you already have love handles." I'm 10 years old. I don't know what the heck love handles are. I'd never heard that term in my life.
Yeah.
And it was clear that this was something that they, one, were not finding acceptable. And I asked them what it was. They explained it to me. And I got the sense that when they used the phrase, "You shouldn't have them already." Okay. All of a sudden, I went from completely loving and accepting myself without question, without judgment, to now believing that there were conditions upon which I was allowed to love and accept myself. And in that moment at 10 years old, there was another narrative that was presented to me, which was, if there's one condition, what are the others and why do I not know what they are? And how do I find out what they are so that I can meet them, so that at least to my parents, I'm acceptable and lovable.
Got it.
10, your parents are your entire world. And to not be accepted and not to be loved by your parents is to feel like the world doesn't want you.
Yeah.
And at about the same time, I was diagnosed with ADHD, had a doctor who, without saying these words exactly, said to me, "There's something else about you that's broken. There's something else about you that the rest of the world doesn't find acceptable. They don't want to see it in you. They don't even want to know that you have it. And thank goodness what we're going to do is we're going to give you this pill, and it's called Ritalin, and it's going to hide this broken part in you so that you can now fit in. You can conform to society. People will find you acceptable." And this further sold me this narrative that I had to be the things everyone else needed me to be in order to be acceptable and lovable to myself.
Yeah.
And by the time I started high school, my prescription from Ritalin became Adderall. And we had moved to Austin. And so I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any friends. And then people found out that I had Adderall, and all of a sudden I started getting invited to parties. Started wanting me around. And that felt really good.
Yeah.
Really good because I felt valuable to other people. I felt like there was something about me that they wanted around that other people couldn't offer them. And it made me feel special. It made me feel wanted. And I can remember the second that I used Adderall as a recreational drug, it was like everything that I believed that was broken about me was fixed instantly.
So you're already using it medically, but there was something about the switch.
Something about it to where it presented this possibility of a future that made sense in a meaningful way. It presented the opportunity to, I was slightly overweight. I was the awkward freshman kid. I was slightly overweight. Well, Adderall is an amphetamine. I know you're familiar with this, but for those of you who are listening who don't know, Adderall is an amphetamine. That's what the stuff is. That's why it works so well. So I was losing weight became a breeze. I didn't want to eat. I was a shy freshman kid. When I was on a lot of Adderall, I had unbelievable confidence. I could go up to anybody, talk to them, make friends. My study habits they started to look like what my dad wanted them to look like. And so I started to look like the person I thought my dad wanted me to look like. And it just seemed to fix everything that I believed needed to be fixed so that I could fit in.
So what I think this is interesting because a lot of people obviously are have heard of or have used Adderall. What was the switch? Like, were you using it at different times? Were you using it at different doses?
Yeah, I was prescribed a dose of like 20 milligrams for every 24 hours at the time. And I went to a party and everyone was asking for it. And I didn't know that it was a recreational drug. And then someone said, oh, dude, you should take 3 of them. And I took 60 milligrams. And then it was like this switch went off where the world seemed to make sense. Like it seemed I found this thing that filled this hole in me that said, you're not enough, but now you are.
Yeah.
Here's the answer to every single thing you ever thought you couldn't solve.
Were you already drinking by that time?
No. I mean, I was drinking at high school parties, but it wasn't like I wasn't, and alcohol never became a problem for me. I drank to fit in, but I never like drank on my own.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is I remember the first time I drank, and even though alcohol didn't end up being my main problem either, I had a similar experience where I'm sort of sitting in a room full of people that normally I'd feel awkward and weird around.
Yeah.
And now I felt totally normal. I could talk to girls. I could feel like I'm one of the guys and not sit around just worried about myself the whole time. And so, it's interesting that so many of us have that experience, which is really what we're going for anyway.
Yeah.
And it almost doesn't, well, it matters what the drug is to some extent, but it almost doesn't.
It's right, because the drug will create a different result, but at the end of the day, we're all seeking the same thing.
Yeah.
And, it worked for me in high school. I lost the weight. I had girlfriends. I had tons of friends. I got a scholarship to college that I wanted to go to. I mean, the more I took of this drug, the more it seemed to make me the person I thought was going to live the life I deserved.
Got it.
And in college, things took a turn because that's when more became not enough. And that's when not enough became this constant evaluation of how much do I have left? How long will it last? Where will I get more? How much will it cost? What do I have to do? And what lies do I have to tell in order to achieve that?
So is that actually a supply thing more than anything else? Like, it sounds like in high school, you had no problem getting it.
The thing was that the amount that I was taking just increased exponentially. So I was, before I could, take 60 milligrams here, 60 milligrams there. But now it was like every single day, all the time. There wasn't a single thing I would do without taking extra Adderall. And so, by the time I dropped out of college, I moved back to Austin, Texas, and I like fell into the life. I mean, I started doctor shopping. I started forging prescriptions. I started dealing and, buying and selling drugs on the street. I was stealing from people. I treated my family like absolute garbage.
Yeah.
The only time I would be around them was to either blame them and shame them for all the things that was going wrong with me or to get money from them so that I could buy more drugs, which made me do more things that made me hate myself, which made me use more drugs. It was just that constant vicious downward cycle and spiral into something that was once the greatest solution I'd ever found to escaping a painful place, and a place that was too painful to be, had now, in this slightest and most imperceptible way, become the most overwhelming problem I'd ever faced.
Yeah, I think that experience is a mirror for a lot of us, right? These things do initially work they seem like they fix it, but they're essentially a really, really good band-aid on a much deeper core issue that we have, whatever that may be for each one of us.
Yeah.
And then you learn to rely on it. But anytime that you learn to rely on one solution to a slew of problems, you end up becoming dependent on it because you like that life far more than you like life without it. And so you keep relying on it. And then you get the dependence and withdrawal and this increased tolerance, which means that over time you need more and more of the thing. And eventually all of us find ourselves in this place. And it sounds like you're describing that place for you.
I really like the way Yohan Hari describes addiction. And he says, Yohan Hari says that at its core, addiction is about not wanting to be present in your life because your life has become too painful a place to be.
Yeah, now that's the end point.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm saying is that's even how it starts.
Yes. How it starts is that what you're doing feels so successful. And it feels like there's never going to be a time where you don't have it managed, you don't have control. And it's just like this subtle and imperceptible shift into this uncontrollable situation where you wake up and all of a sudden it's all you can think about. You have no idea why it's become the most overwhelming and pressing concern in your life. And you could never explain to somebody who would say to you, man, what's going on with you lately? Like, you're doing all these things, you're getting into trouble. Like, what's happening? You could never explain to them why you believe so strongly that you can get it back to the way it was. You could never explain to them how much sense it makes to you because they can never know how successful it felt in those first few times when you used.
Yeah.
And it has to be able to get back. There's a way to figure it out. Like, that was the mindset. Like, as cliche as it sounds, that was the thing that was going through my mind. Like, I'm going to figure this out, and figuring it out is just getting more. Once I have enough, then I'll be able to manage it in a way, but I just need the surplus. Once I get the surplus, I'm set. And it was just this quest for it, and it was never enough. And
yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, as somebody who ended up selling meth and having way, way more than enough, it doesn't, I mean, I think this is obvious to say, but it doesn't actually solve anything. It just allows you to stay stuck in that place for a much, much longer time period because running out of the drug is no longer a concern. So then you're kind of like, okay, well, what do I do? And you realize the life you're living, the actual day-to-day behavior and the activity that you're engaged in is useless, meaningless, painful, isolated, et cetera, et cetera.
You find out that the drug is necessary because of how disconnected you are from meaningful bonds in life that give you the experience of being alive, and that the substance is never going to give it back to you. And like, that's where that brokenness comes into play. Like, that's where that feeling that everything that is wrong and painful about your life today, there's a certainty that it will be worse tomorrow. And the drug is the only thing that will keep you from, from being able to tolerate it.
Yeah.
Allow you to tolerate it. And I know for me, I was using I would say the last 5 years of my substance abuse, the average prescription for Adderall is like 15 milligrams a day. And I was doing 450 in a 24-hour period. And I would do it for like 6 days straight. I was eating like 5,000 calories of fast food on the days when I wasn't getting drugs. I was such a mess.
Yeah. So I remember the 5-6 day runs. If you're like me, it took something pretty monumental to get you off that track. What happened in your life that shifted course?
So I know exactly the day. It was August 21st of 2012. I was 30 years old. I was 350 pounds, living hurt, in every sense of the word. I was 2 weeks away from being homeless. Wasn't talking to my family, hadn't seen my friends in I don't know how long, hadn't worked in forever. Everything about my life was a struggle. Yeah. And, like I said, living hurt physically, spiritually, emotionally. And I had tried for the longest time to hate myself and my life enough to want to do something different. And the only thing that came of that was just a belief that I would never be able to reconnect to that meaningful experience of being alive. And on August 21st of 2012, I tried to end my life. Popped a bunch of pills. And I remember the experience of overdosing. And I remember like this black fading in, and then it was almost like the universe closed its doors on me. And I collapsed on the floor. Hours later to wake up in a puddle of my own vomit in a pile of fast food garbage in the dark, alone. And it was the most terrifying and relieving experience of my life. See, I thought that I would wake up I thought when I woke up that I would be upset that, I wasn't successful. But I had this unbelievable experience of relief, and that relief told me that there was something about myself, something about my life that I loved enough that even though I knew today was going to hurt, I still wanted to be a part of it. And, I was that person that would say shit like, you know what, this is how I'm going to live my life. It cost me 10 years. Fuck it. I'm okay with that. And, that's a shit bargain, because that experience of almost losing my life was the most incredible lesson on how valuable time is. And, if I had been successful, what would my family do for just 5 more years with me? 5 days, 5 hours. The things that we choose to believe about ourselves have consequences on us and the people that we love. And I told myself in that moment, I was going to pick up the phone, I was going to call my parents, and I asked for help, and I checked into rehab, where within 72 hours, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, erectile dysfunction, bipolar disorder, suicidal depression, anxiety disorder, sleep disorder, attention deficit disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And I was put on a cabinet's worth of medication for life. And they kept selling me this bullshit narrative that this is what you are because you were born that way.
Yeah.
An addict, always an addict. You are diabetic. You are these things that you struggle with. And, thankfully, about a year before that date, I had an opportunity to attend an event hosted by a man named Rip Esselstyn, who's the executive producer of the film The Game Changers. He's also the creator of the Engine 2 diet. It's essentially what I learned is that I learned about the power of plant-based nutrition. And I was being presented with a very specific narrative by this doctor sitting in front of me that was vastly different from the narrative that was presented to me by these doctors, these plant-based doctors. And what they said was that the plant-based narrative was this: everything you're experiencing makes sense. Everything you're going through is a reasonable response to how you've been living your life. Your body is responding exactly as we predicted it would, and that there's nothing wrong with you. That this is all a biological response to the environment that you'd found yourself in. And I told myself that was the narrative I was going to choose to believe at this point. That yeah, I was in an awful situation. But that awful situation was less a brokenness in me and more a brokenness of the environment that I'd found myself in. And so I decided I was going to adopt a plant-based diet, because for me, that was an A plus B equals C equation. Right? The emotional stuff, the psychology, all that stuff. So I told myself I was going to do this. I was going to do this plant-based thing, and I would get up every single day, and I would go to when I moved into sober living after 30 days of rehab, I had my house manager, get me all the plant-based foods I wanted. I would go to the cabinet and I'd open it up, and there standing in front of me was 2 options: the oatmeal that I asked for and the Fruity Pebbles that someone else had asked for. And Fruity Pebbles was damn. I love Fruity Pebbles. And I'm sitting here knowing that if I choose the Fruity Pebbles, it's going to continue to fuel the things in my life that will separate me from what I want to do.
Yeah.
And if I choose the oatmeal, it's going to help fuel my connection to the meaningful bonds in life that I'm seeking to gain. So why in the world, knowing these two things, would I want to choose the Fruity Pebbles, right? Why could this whole thing not simply be a matter of intellect and will? Why would I not know what to do, want to do it? End of story. And then luckily I happened upon a TED Talk called The Pleasure Trap. He explains that there's a biological mechanism of compulsion, that anytime we engage in a behavior that creates a dopamine response that is outside the bounds of the normal human experience, that the body perceives it as an indication of biological success, that we have just done something that increases our statistical likelihood of survival. Because remember, the human species evolved for let's say 95% of our time evolving has been in the natural environment, which is an environment of scarcity. So anytime we would find food or behavior that would create a dopamine response, and we all know that dopamine is the chemical that gives us the excited euphoria that we call pleasure. But dopamine is a signal that indicates that we've just found something or done something in the environment that's either good for survival or bad for survival.
Yeah. So actually, technically, I want to correct something, because a lot of people talk about dopamine as a pleasure neurotransmitter, but it has more to do with reward, as you just pointed out, which is that something good just happened versus the visceral experience of the something good happening. So it seems like opioid, serotonin, when it comes to social interaction, maybe oxytocin, are more about the actual visceral experience of the thing, whereas dopamine is like a signal that you're right, that there's something positive just happened, and something positive and unexpected specifically. So
Right.
you get it when you found out something good and new just occurred in your environment. And so for those of us who've been using drugs, that's, that becomes one of the markers, right? Everybody talks about dopamine response all the time, but it also happens when you meet somebody you're excited about, or you have sex for the first time with someone, or it happens when anything pleasurable just occurred. It's just not necessarily where the feeling of pleasure comes from, is the dopamine. And the reason I say that is drugs will continue releasing dopamine long after they're pleasurable.
Yes.
Because the experience of the pleasure from opioids and things like that has actually kind of gone down substantially, but your brain still thinks they're good.
Yeah. It's like you said, it's that signal that indicates to us that we have just done something that it believes benefits us in the long term.
Yeah.
And knowing this, I had this unbelievable sort of aha moment, right? That when I ate 2 McDonald's cheeseburgers, or when I popped 120 milligrams of Adderall at a time, my body had a response that went, bravo, dude. I don't know what that was, but man, that's got to be the right thing to do. If ever you have the opportunity to do it again, please do so, because that is more than likely increasing our statistical likelihood of survival. That is the best thing you've interpreted the modern environment effectively. It doesn't understand it. Our entire motivational system, right? Our entire motivational system is spun 180 degrees against a problem it can't interpret, which is the modern environment. And I also learned from this TED Talk that if I was simply willing to get up and be comfortable being uncomfortable and make the choice that I know is in alignment with what I'm trying to achieve, that the dopamine receptors would reset, they regain sensitivity in a state of deprivation, and that the healthy food would actually start to taste better. And a biological fact that this would occur. And that gave me motivation to be like, okay, I understand that this is not an indication of weakness. This isn't willpower. What this is a very powerful motivational system that is responding to an environment that it can't understand. This is me having to be very logical and very rational about what I want, so that I can be very aware of this motivational system when it tries to compel me to make choices I don't want to make. And every single time I got up and made a plate of food, it was about health and wellness. That was about creating a healthier version of myself today than I was the day before. I would say to myself, this is not just food. This is an act of self-care. This is an act of self-love. This is me saying, in this moment, I am worthy of the healing that I want in my life. Not when I lose the weight, not when I reverse the disease, but right here, right now, in this moment, I'm everything I've ever needed to be. And within 4 months, the diabetes, the heart disease, the erectile dysfunction were completely reversed. Within 10 months, I'd lost over 100 pounds. And within 1 year, I was off of every single psych medication I was prescribed in rehab. Every single diagnosis has been removed from my chart. And there was this profound experience of seeing what happened when I simply made one environment change. When I saw for us as humans, to create the life we want to live, it's like evidence that our bodies have never given up on us, that they've been fighting for us since day one. And when I was willing to sit in those, because here's the thing, like I would get up at like month 4, month 5, after having reversed the disease, and I'd have unbelievable temptations and cravings for using, unbelievable temptations and cravings for food that was destroying my life, for drugs that was destroying my life. And I had a conversation with my therapist. I was like, man, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. He goes, well, Adam, have you ever considered that you're doing nothing wrong? Have you ever considered that it would be possible to be human and not experience these things? To not experience temptations and cravings and urges and anxiety and fear and sadness. And it caused me to pause for a moment. And I found this place of calm stillness where I was like, well, shit, no. But is it possible to have those things and be okay with it? Right. To not see them as indications of failure. To see the entire breadth of human emotion as equally meaningful, equally valuable. To not see one half of it as like an indication of, yeah, you're doing everything right. And the other half is, oh, you got to fix something. So that these signals arise and I don't have to confront them or insult them or fight them, but see them as a guide that says, here is how you're acting in alignment with your values or not. And It was in that moment that I found like this empowering vehicle of recovery, where it's like, sobriety to me is not recovery.
Sure.
Sobriety is simply just not using, and I know that for me, I used because I was wishing the moments that I was in were different and they weren't going to be. And that moment I was presented with my therapist, it was like this microcosm of that experience where he's like, Adam, you have to be present with these feelings. You have to be able to be present with them and be okay with them. And the foundation that I built for myself throughout recovery had given me the ability to be like, I'm okay with this. It's tough, it's hard, and I'm going to be okay. And that really like strengthened this recovery that I've been, in recovery now for 8 years. And it's just been, the weight loss, all that stuff is great. Like, that's the thing. Like, everyone says, Adam, tell us a story about how you lost weight, how you lost 180 pounds, how you got off disease, how, you stayed sober for 8 years and found recovery. I'm like, yeah, that's not the story. People would say, people like to think that humans are motivated by negative consequences. I just don't believe that to be true.
I think one of the things that I hear in your story that is very prevalent in all the people I've worked with and in my own story as well is the concept of self-acceptance, which it sounds like you had many reasons to want to change self, right? Diabetes, hypertension, erectile dysfunction, the weight, all those were specific things about yourself that it was easy not to like because the world told you that they're bad. And so in early recovery, the journey was on how to fix those. And one set of doctors was telling you take this medication for the rest of your life. Another set of doctors was telling you change your eating habits, and you picked the path that you went on. And that path did provide you with some positive outcomes in terms of the weight loss and the diabetes and all those things. But in the process, what you found was that even when you fixed those things, you weren't necessarily a happier human being. You were just less troubled by the things everybody in society knew were bad. And so you had reached a new point. And in that new point, it was like, hey, you should be really happy now. You're not using your drugs and you weigh what you should weigh. And you're not diabetic anymore. You should be happy. Mm-hmm. And that's the moment where you realize, oh, wait, we don't reach nirvana. There's no moment. I don't give a fuck how long you've been sober. I don't care how much you weigh, how many girlfriends you have, or how many people you want to have sex with you on a daily basis. I don't care how much money's in your bank account, what car you drive. If you don't have money for a plane ticket, or if you own a private jet, like none of those things that I just described deliver happiness. Now, that's not to say that if you have gone through self-acceptance, and if you are in a place that feels good to you internally, that having a private jet doesn't make life fun. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying too many of us focus on those external goals. And I think, like it or not, traditional, I'll say it, recovery community, or the traditional recovery approaches oftentimes make that easier, right? Because they tell you, well, if you're like those guys and you reach 20 years of sobriety, oh, the life you'll have. But that's bullshit. It's
Exactly.
not true.
Exactly.
You
I'm
can,
so disillusioned by this traditional recovery model because what I see is that they're focusing on a dependency problem that doesn't speak to the human who's in pain, right? I think that what it comes down to when I look at my experience, people would say, oh, you wanted to change because you were overweight, because you had diabetes, because you had heart disease. It's like, yes, all of those things were occurring, but those were negative consequences that were threatening meaningful bonds in my life that mattered. And it was those meaningful bonds in life that motivated me to want to change so that I could keep them around, so I could have a greater connection. What it is about myself and my life. I read on your Instagram someone a quote that said, "I've never hated something enough to love it."
mm,
And that really resonated with me, because if you think about it, what recovery for me has been is a reconnection to, I would say, 4 or 5 meaningful bonds in life. Okay. A meaningful bond with myself, both physically, spiritually, and emotionally, that I want to show up and be present for every single day. A meaningful bond with people in my life that matter, that I have value to share with them and they have value to share with me, that I want to show up and be present for every single day. A meaningful bond with the purpose in my life that is beyond myself, that I want to show up and be present for in a meaningful way every single day. And a future that makes sense to me and is achievable in a meaningful way. Those connections, when those connections are secure, I have this unbelievable experience of being alive in a way that feels good, makes sense, and that I want to show up and be present for.
yeah.
The reason why substance abuse is no longer part of that equation is because substance abuse removes my ability to be present for those meaningful bonds. Now, if 10 years ago, unbelievably disconnected from every single one of those, in a state of absolute pain, when presented with the opportunity to use, I grabbed a hold of it, because it removed the experience of that momentary pain of knowing how disconnected I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What I love about these conversations that we have is how it always does go back to having to start with self-acceptance somehow, even when you're in the middle of the worst of it all, right? It's like self-acceptance doesn't happen when everything is going well.
Right.
Self-acceptance is actually something you barely even need when everything is going well, because it's fine. Your day's good. You have people who love you. You're healthy. Your bright future is ahead of you. In those moments, whether you have self-acceptance or not, things sort of look the same. It's in those moments of pain that it can be the hardest. We have people in our online groups, and one of my favorite things to watch is actually, it just happened yesterday, but is when somebody is brand new, they just come in and they're in the middle of beating themselves up over it. Nobody comes into recovery because they're having a great week. Right. You come in because you're at your lowest. And so this woman was talking about just the last 2-3 days of her life. She found out because of Corona, she wouldn't be able to have her family over for Christmas. And, her oldest child's 30 some years old. She's like, I've seen them for Christmas for 30 some years. I live on my own. I'm going to have to spend this holiday on my own. So she did some things that she was really ashamed of. And after she tells the story, it was her first group with us. And so I said this thing that I tell all the people we work with, and that is, you know what? Whether you realize it right now or not, you're just doing your best. Right now, you're just doing your best. And when you found out this really shocking, terrible thing that was going to end up happening, and you're going to spend this week that you've always spent with your family alone, it put you in a terrible state of mind. And you just did the thing you know how to do, which is you scored some more drugs so that you can avoid the pain. There's nothing wrong with you because you did that. You're just doing what you know how to do. It's all good. The only thing that we need to work on is connect you to a community, give you a way to not have to feel shame about always trying your best and starting to also give you new ways of dealing with some of this pain or new ways of addressing it. And I find that too often, and maybe we can kind of shift to this piece because we talked a little bit about the traditional recovery world. I find that too often um, we we try to marshal others change, not self change, but others change through the stick method, right? As in, hey, you effed up and you knew better. You should have called me before you did that.
Mhm.
But it's fine. Just come to the meeting today and we'll just handle it. You'll take a newcomer chip, you'll stand up, you'll admit your wrongs to everybody, and
Yeah.
everything will be fine. You can get started again. And that's a very different, in a nuanced way, but very different than saying, hey, man, you must have been in a lot of pain to do that. Um, I get it. I've been in that sort of pain before, and I totally understand why it made sense in the moment. Thank you so much for sharing honestly with me, because I know that just being able to share it with me has made the experience less painful. So thank you for allowing me to help in that way. And hey, let's just talk about what we can do to make right now better and just walk through this together. And I feel
I,
like if the entire industry could just shift to that mentality, there'd be more people who wouldn't have to pop a bunch of pills hoping that they don't wake up the next day, but instead be willing to and maybe even excited to get involved and talk to somebody else about their pain because they know there's not shame on the other side of it.
I think that that is exactly the direction that addiction recovery needs to move. I think it is moving that way. I think, you see people like yourself, you see a lot of voices out there that are pushing this message, and I'm honored to consider myself one of them. That I think that human beings are always trying to do the best they can with what they know, and sometimes what they know isn't the most effective way of creating the positive change they want, and it's okay not to know what to do. Okay, most of us were raised in a way where we don't know how to live best as humans. We know how to be successful in society. We're taught what to think and how to think, and what to think and what to say and all those sorts of things, but we're not taught how to be and be okay with what arises.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, the things we experience, there's this narrative out there that so much of what we feel is a pathology, right?
Yes.
That like the
I
sadness we feel is a pathology. The
I hate
depression,
labels. I just hate
I hate it.
mental health labels. Hate them.
It's, what if the sadness, the fear, the anxiety that you feel, those moments that are so difficult and that cause you to consider yourself as a failure or being broken, what if they're the sanest response you could be having given what's happening in your life?
Or let's even go back, right? Because now I know your story. What if when you were a kid, the idea that you had a hard time sitting down and doing homework was not perceived as he's got a condition and we have to fix the condition, otherwise known as Adam, by the way, right? That
Yep.
condition was you. So, like, we have a kid. One of our kids cannot peel himself from a book. He reads while eating his breakfast. He reads while going to the bathroom. He'll forget to shower and brush his teeth because he's reading. My other kid, you got to kind of force him to sit down and read. All he wants to do is move around, get his skateboard out, go out, do jumping jacks and handstands. One of those is not right and the other is not wrong. And yes, Leo has a hard time sitting in a class for an hour and a half. So what do we do? Do we say, well, Leo, you've got to be able to sit down for an hour and a half in a classroom because if you can't, we're going to have to give you these drugs. He's 8 years old. I mean, some kids are getting medicated at 8, 9, 10. It's it's insane to me. We've gotten to this place where we pathologize so much that we try to fix, and I'm putting that in air quotes, we try to fix people, which really what that means is we try to make them behave more like we would like for them to behave.
Exactly.
And then we wonder why that causes pain. I mean, if we go back to the origin, and I always do this work with my clients in the Hero program, it's a big, big part of what we remind people is, hey, you got here because of things you learned along the way. You didn't start shooting heroin for no reason. You didn't start popping 400 milligrams of Adderall for no reason. Adam, people handed you Adderall and said, this will make you more like the person you should be. And
Exactly.
and you just fucking ran with it. You just, because it made sense. It was these adults. They told you it.
I think that the majority of the things that I've struggled with in my life began the day that somebody and something told me that there was something I had to be in order to be acceptable, and I believed it. I believed it with every single cell of my body, and I believed that I was going to stop at nothing to meet those conditions.
Of course, because you want love and you want connection.
Exactly. And you believe that if you sit outside of those conditions of others, that the love and connection is unavailable. And that is such a misconception, right? If you sit outside of the conditions of others, what you're doing is you're owning yourself.
Yeah.
When you own yourself completely, when you say, you know what, I like to say, self-care and self-love is about loving yourself, flaws and all, completely as you are.
Yeah.
And knowing there's work to be done.
100%.
Right?
Yeah. At the same time, right?
Yeah. At the same time, is not like self-love doesn't happen when you're flawless, right? Self-love is a state of knowing that you are everything you've ever needed. You are worthy of the life that you want, that a body size doesn't determine your worth, right? That a chronic disease state, the absence of or presence of, doesn't determine whether you have a life that you deserve, right? That the financial stability that you either have or don't have doesn't determine whether or not you're acceptable to the world.
Yeah.
That what we have to do is be willing to practice remembering who we've always been and what feels in alignment with how we want to move, to discover some of what is best about being alive.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that so much. So let our listeners know where can people see you? I mean, obviously you're on social media, etc., and get connected to some of your recovery journey.
Yeah. So my Instagram is @plantbasedaddict. I also have a Facebook page by the same title. I have a nonprofit called Plant Based for Positive Change that is running the very first dietary research study on the effects of nutrition and early addiction recovery outcomes. You can check that out. There's a GoFundMe if you'd like to donate to that research study. It's quite a groundbreaking study, since there's never been a single nutrition study on early addiction recovery ever done. We're really excited about it. It's in the 12th month right now, and the results are just, they're out of this world.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, one of the things in the Hero program we recommend for people, it's so funny and it's so simple, but drink more water, reduce the amount of like prepackaged food. So we go much simpler, I think, than the set of recommendations you have. But we even go, we go simply. It's like the amount of poison you sometimes put in your body without even looking at it, just by not looking at the ingredient list of the crap you put in your body, is insane. It's like, well, this is actually, this is a funny story maybe. But I had a client, a very, very wealthy client, who his thing was cocaine. He smoked cocaine. You listeners might know it as crack. But one morning he was waking up, and I was trying to make coffee and looking for a sweetener of some sort. And he was like, "Oh, I don't have sugar in the house." And I said, "Well, what do you have instead?" And he said, I don't really use sweeteners. They're not good for you." And I was like, "Wait, weren't you up all night smoking crack?" And we kind of had a laugh about it. But the funny thing is that everything you put in your body matters. We can't demonize alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, meth, Adderall, everything else, and then on the flip side go and buy like mac and cheese with 87 ingredients in them, 45 of which you literally would not be able to pronounce, and it's like sitting in a can, shelf stable for 47 years, and go, this has got to be good, right? Like this should be fine.
Well, at least it's not, at least it's socially acceptable is the thing. Yes. So, I think that the answer to health, the answer to health in all aspects, we're sold this narrative that it's less, right? You got to eat less junk food. You got to eat, do less sitting around, less, right? The abstinence model. And what abstinence says to us is that what we really want, we can't have. right? But the answer is always more. Human beings crave meaningful abundance. Our brains are not fans of scarcity. So being told less of something doesn't feel good. It's more healing foods. It's more purposeful movement. It's more water, more sunshine, more restorative sleep, more human connection, and more meaningful purpose and service. This is what is going to create the sense of aliveness that you're looking for. And however that ends up looking for you, whether it's weight loss, weight gain, that's irrelevant. What is important is to focus on what you're gaining in your life and the things that you can bring into your life in a great amount of abundance that will bring it to you.
Yeah,
I think that if we focus that way, and the same thing with recovery, the answer is not less drugs, okay? The answer is not less drugs. It's never been less drugs. It's more meaningful connection to who you are and the world that you live in and the people that you serve.
100%. It's one of our biggest pitches. And Adam, thank you so much for coming on here and having this discussion. Always excited to present more ways for people to connect to messages that resonate with them, because as you pointed out, that's the point of this, right? Is present more options for people so that somebody can latch onto an option that sounds right to them and that really allows them to fill their life. I'm a firm believer in that. You fill your life with good and the bad will gradually crowd itself out because it has no effing space.
No one removes negativity. They overcrowd it with positivity. That's the way it works.
Absolutely. Love it so much. Thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
So happy to connect. And everybody, do me a favor, tag me, tag Ignited, tag Adam, and let us know what resonated the most for you. And if you're really, really in on it, commit to one thing you're going to do that we talked about here today to make your life better. We'd love to see that. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you. So please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.